Hello fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and today we're going to break down Cinderella's entire timeline. We'll explore everything from Cinderella's tragic origins, to her struggling to express herself as a princess, to the time travel insanity that was caused by her evil stepmother. But throughout all of the madness of Cinderella's timeline, her story always begins in the same way. Cinderella was born within a small, charming kingdom to two loving parents. At a young age, Cinderella lost her mother, and in hopes of rebuilding the family, Cinderella's father married Lady Tremaine, who had two daughters of her own, Anastasia and Drizella. After Cinderella's father passed away, though, Cinderella's life fell apart. The family estate was put under the control of Cinderella's stepmother, while Cinderella was forced by her family to be a servant in her own home. She was abused and humiliated and was forced to watch as her family's wealth was squandered and the chateau fell into disrepair. But Cinderella remained steadfast, strong, and kind even through all of those hardships. She had a pure heart. And with today's sponsor, Disney Collect, we want to help you celebrate the beauty and mighty perseverance that exists in Cinderella and every Disney princess. You see, the Disney Collect app allows you to get virtual cards of all of your favorite characters, including our very own Cinderella. And right now you can collect a special version of her throughout the final days of a limited time collection titled Heart of a Princess, which highlights the true colors of the Disney princesses. With the cards you open from packs, missions, and their arcade, you can work to complete sets, craft them into rarer cards, and even trade them with friends you have connected with in the app or other fans from around the world. You can begin collecting your own sets of Disney digital cards today by downloading the app through my link below. And once you're all set up, you can follow me just like all my social accounts by searching Isaac Carlson. While living as a servant, Cinderella never stopped dreaming, and her constant warmth and optimism allowed her to befriend the birds, the mice, and the animals she attended. I mean, all of them except Lady Tremaine's cat, Lucifer. Two of the most notable companions Cinderella meets are Jacques and Octavius, better known as Gus Gus.
Gus.
Now, as Cinderella was growing up, the charming prince of her kingdom was pressured by the king to settle down, marry, and bring him grandchildren. When the king's patience grew thin, he decided to arrange a ball for all of the eligible maidens of the kingdom.
Why, he's bound to show interest in one of them, isn't he?
And luckily, Cinderella's heart was still open. With the help of her fairy godmother, Cinderella was not only able to attend the ball, but she also had the chance to dance the night away with the prince, and under the moonlight that evening, they fell in love. Cinderella only left his side when the clock began to strike at midnight, and much to the disappointment of the prince, the only proof of her existence that was left behind was a single glass slipper. Committed to finding the mystery girl, the king declared that any woman who fit the glass slipper would be married to his son. Unfortunately, Lady Tremaine had figured out Cinderella was the woman the prince wanted to marry, so she locked her stepdaughter away in hopes of giving her own daughters the opportunity to fit into the glass slipper. Now, the arrival of the Grand Duke and the glass slipper is where the timeline would one day be altered. While we'll continue to keep understanding what took place in the traditional timeline, remember this moment, because while it was once the start of Cinderella's happily ever after, it would also be the instance where Cinderella's story would begin to be unraveled. Originally, Gus, Jacques, and the rest of Cinderella's animal friends were able to free Cinderella from her quarters, and while Lady Tremaine was able to destroy the glass slipper in hopes of forcing her stepdaughter to continue to suffer under her watch, Cinderella was able to present her other glass slipper to the Grand Duke. And of course, when she tried it on, it fit perfectly. Cinderella had proven that she was the girl the prince had fallen in love with, and in the coming days the royal couple was married in a grand fashion. Afterwards, Cinderella and the prince then ventured beyond the kingdom as husband and wife. During their honeymoon, Cinderella's animal friends moved into the castle while Lady Tremaine and Cinderella's stepsisters were left living at the chateau. Only now, without Cinderella, Anastasia and Drizella had to do the chores for their mother. Upon Cinderella's return, she was immediately put in charge of planning a lavish event known as the Royal Banquet, and a loyal servant to the king named Prudence was tasked with attempting to instruct Cinderella on how to be a princess. But no matter how much Prudence tried to change Cinderella, the new princess was unwilling to become someone she wasn't.
I know I can do this. I just have to stop trying to be someone else.
She opened up the curtains to the castle, walked amongst her subjects in the market, began serving delightful chocolate pudding for dessert, and even welcomed commoners to the royal banquet. While she was absolutely not a conventional royal, Cinderella became a princess who was adored by the kingdom. Long after the ball, the fairy godmother remained a close friend to Cinderella. She was often present within the castle, and over time she became well acquainted with the mice and Prince Charming. The mice would even spend time with her privately in the castle, which led to fairy godmother eventually granting Jacques' wish to become a human. Quickly he learned though that he could make an impact in the world just being who he was, and so he returned to his life as a mouse. Now, a year after Cinderella and Prince Charming's wedding, Anastasia and Drizella both stated that they had never been welcomed to the castle by Cinderella, but in Cinderella II, Dreams Come True, we are shown that Cinderella does one day open up to them again. If the timeline was allowed to continue as it was meant to, Cinderella would actually invite her entire stepfamily to one of her balls.
Cinderella's ball is tomorrow night. Every noble bachelor in the kingdom will be there.
Leading up to that event, Lady Tremaine ordered her daughters to attempt to find a wealthy husband of high nobility, but what Anastasia actually desired more than anything was to discover true love. She eventually found that with a simple baker. With the help of Cinderella, Anastasia would go on to fight against her own self-hatred, she'd defy her mother's commands, and she'd embrace the man she loved, allowing her to become truly happy.
I never dreamed I could be this happy. Oh, how you see? Dreams do come true.
Cinderella and Prince Charming had a perfectly wonderful life together, and they were confident nothing could stand between them. And that remained true even when their timeline was brought down a new direction. You see, in Cinderella III, A Twist in Time, during Cinderella and Prince Charming's one-year anniversary, Anastasia followed her stepsister into the woods, a decision that was pivotal in leading to the timeline to become corrupted. If Anastasia had decided to stay home, the timeline would have been able to keep moving forward. But instead, Anastasia found Cinderella's celebration and discovered that her stepsister's happily ever after had been created in part through the use of magic. With that discovery, Cinderella's timeline could not proceed as we once knew it. You see, once Anastasia was given an opportunity to take Fairy Godmother's wand for herself, she brought it home to her mother, who initially dismissed its abilities until she witnessed the power it possessed when Fairy Godmother was turned to stone. With the wand under Lady Tremaine's control, she used the magic to tear apart Cinderella's happily ever after, bringing herself and her daughters back in time to the moment just before the Grand Duke arrived at their home with the glass slipper. The wicked stepmother then used Fairy Godmother's wand to make the glass slipper fit Anastasia before Cinderella was able to be freed from her room with the other glass slipper. While Cinderella was supposed to be whisked away to marry her true love, in this new timeline, it was actually Lady Tremaine and her daughters who were brought before the prince. Of course, the prince knew Anastasia was not the woman he danced with at the ball, which meant he quickly and politely turned them away.
It would appear that more than one girl actually fits the slipper.
But Lady Tremaine would not give up so easily. Tremaine altered his memories to be filled with Anastasia, leading to him immediately proposing. Sure, Cinderella tried to reconnect with the prince by sneaking into the castle, but it seemed like she was outmatched by Tremaine.
I am not going to let you get away with this.
We already have.
By the orders of Lady Tremaine, Cinderella was placed on a ship to be banished from the kingdom, but Jacques and Gus were on a mission to set things right. They explained the truth to the prince, that he was under a spell, and once he saw that she had a glass slipper, he went after Cinderella to save her life. The moment that they were together and they held hands, the curse was lifted from his mind, and right there he proposed to the girl he was really in love with. The only problem was, Lady Tremaine was still in possession of the wand. Before Cinderella's wedding, Tremaine disguised Anastasia as Cinderella, while the real Cinderella was sent away in a magical pumpkin driven by Lucifer, who was ordered to bring them to their death. Luckily though, with the help of Jacques and Gus again, Cinderella escaped before her life was taken and she set her sights back on the kingdom. Although Anastasia was close to marrying the prince, she eventually realized she could not live with the lie any longer. She wanted someone to love her for who she was, and while Lady Tremaine attempted to continue her plot for ultimate power, she was inevitably stopped when one of her own spells was reflected back at her. While Tremaine and Drizella were turned into toads and went on to be forced to become scullery maids, through Anastasia's honesty and sacrifice, Cinderella and Anastasia began their journey to become friends. Fairy Godmother was freed, Cinderella and the prince were married, and they all lived happily ever after again. But what happened to the first happily ever after? Was it completely erased from time, or does it still exist somewhere? Well, this is where I think things get really interesting. You see, Fairy Godmother asked Cinderella and Prince Charming an extremely important question.
Would you like me to return you to your former lives?
Former lives?
The Fairy Godmother knows all of the time travel wasn't supposed to happen, which is why Cinderella is given the option to go back to that life by her Fairy Godmother. Cinderella was meant to live out her days according to the original story, which could mean that the Fairy Godmother believes that there is only one timeline that they can perceive. The way that time travel affects the Tremaines also supports this idea. You see, there weren't other versions of Lady Tremaine and her daughters when they went back in time. Instead of the three women being visitors of the past and interacting with earlier versions of themselves, they seem to replace their former selves. There aren't branches in time that are coming off the original story's timeline when they time travel. Instead, they seem to be erasing the original story.
In the wrong hands, that wand could be extremely dangerous.
And that also explains why there was no Fairy Godmother in the past who was able to stop Lady Tremaine. After Fairy Godmother was turned to stone, she was brought back in time by Lady Tremaine. So the Fairy Godmother in the past was replaced with the petrified version from the future. It seems that at any given time, there can only be one version of each character in existence. What I think this all means is that Cinderella's original happily ever after truly was erased because of the time travel that took place in this timeline. And of course, I think it makes sense. Cinderella wasn't going to have Fairy Godmother alter the timeline to return to her classic story. Cinderella had no memories of her first happily ever after, so she decided not to get rid of the fairy tale she was already living within. Now, there's a part of me that likes this idea that there is only one timeline in Cinderella's universe. Most of the evidence suggests there is only one timeline, and it's also the simplest solution. But I don't love that, because that means Cinderella's original story doesn't actually exist anymore for Cinderella. We can enjoy it, but I don't like that Cinderella had no memories of putting on the glass slipper and getting married and going through all of the events of Cinderella II. I mean, I had the sequel on VHS, I kind of have some nostalgia for it. That's why I kind of prefer a concept that would allow both versions of Cinderella's happily ever after to exist at the same time. A Cinderella multiverse. We know a few things that are always consistent regardless of how many timelines exist. Lady Tremaine never achieves the power and wealth she always desired. Anastasia always falls in love with the baker. Jacques and Gus live out their days serving the kingdom and eating lots of food. And Cinderella and Prince Charming live happily ever after. We also know that in the timeline where Lady Tremaine time travels, Cinderella's new happily ever after is created. But if there was another timeline that existed, where Anastasia didn't follow Cinderella on her anniversary, and she didn't discover the existence of magic, and she never went and time traveled, then Cinderella's original happily ever after would be able to still live on. But fun people, what do you think? Is there a Cinderella multiverse, or is there really only one timeline? Let me know what you think down below, and if you'd like to go into more detail into how Anastasia transformed from an evil stepsister into someone who's good, I've left my video on her down in the description. Consider subscribing to help me reach 1 million subscribers, and finally, thanks for watching, and have a magical day.